Sound is a criminally under-respected aspect of film production, and there's a school of thought that most audiences are more likely to be taken out of the experience of watching a movie by bad sound than by bad picture. With its haunted podcast hook, Undertone has no shortage of respect for the aural arts, and does emphasize them consistently, using sound to ratchet up the intensity and sustain a threatening mood. But with little in the way of interesting visual ideas or compelling drama to support that mood, Undertone is far more muted than its interesting central conceit provides for. I'm Tom Jorgensen, and this is my review of Undertone.
Welcome to the Undertone podcast, where we talk about all things creepy. I'm your in-house skeptic, Evie Babbage.
Undertone follows podcaster Evie, who's largely homebound, taking care of her comatose, dying mama. The auditory experience of Undertone has been billed as critical to the film, and director Ian Tewson gets Undertone off to a good start by quickly establishing Evie's difficult circumstances in a montage that establishes not just the look of the house they share, but the sound. Tewson captures the stillness of the home, Mama's labored breathing, hints at the happier life Evie and her mama shared before she fell ill through a recorded voicemail. These are all reminders of how sidelined Evie has become in her own life, and they use sound to do it. That all slides away when Evie sits at her table and puts her headphones on to record the Undertone podcast, a show in which she skeptically debates her believer co-host Justin about paranormal phenomena and conspiracy theories. Undertone's sound mix focuses in on Evie and Justin's voices at the expense of all other background noise during their recording sessions. It's a great technical hook for the movie that succeeds at not just demonstrating how the podcast is Evie's escape from her dire circumstances, but provides a clean sensory stage for the auditory horror that's to follow.
What were you thinking? You shouldn't have listened to all of them. It's what she wants.
As a device for driving dread in horror, restricting a character's senses and channeling that into the filmmaking is a savvy move to create a base level of tension, and it's a stylistic choice that does help Undertone maintain momentum, even through a mystery that winds up feeling a little bit like a broken record. Evie and Justin receive an anonymous email containing 10 audio recordings from an unknown sender which document the plight of Jessa and Mike, an expectant young couple who seem to have been plagued by a supernatural entity as they're preparing to welcome their baby. From there, Undertone falls into a predictable rhythm. Evie and Justin listen to more of the recordings, which reveal more of the Jessa and Mike thread. Something causes the two to stop the podcast taping, and Evie experiences something spooky in the time before the next session, suggesting that maybe whatever's happening on the tapes is starting up in her own home.
We should stop listening. What if we unleash something?
Opening email attachments from unknown senders is, of course, the reading Sumerian out of a book bound in human flesh of 21st century horror, and that's emblematic of where Undertone fails to consistently deliver on its premise. It's quite old-fashioned. Secret messages in lullabies played in reverse, creepy crying babies, passages that trigger events around the person listening, elements of speech hidden in the spectrogram of the files, long stretches of silence punctuated by spikes in volume for an easy jump scare. These are tricks we've specifically seen and heard before in audio-forward horror like Session 9 or Pontypool, and really across countless other horror movies too. There's nothing inherently wrong with reaching into a well-worn trick bag to put your own spin on the classics, but Undertone's horror seldom takes advantage of the modern trappings of podcasting to any specific degree. The recording of the Undertone podcast episode in question winds up just functioning as a structural home base for the plot, which feels like kind of a missed opportunity for Undertone to create a more unique identity for itself. And I mentioned Pontypool a few seconds ago there, and I cannot recommend checking that movie out enough. It's a 2008 Canadian horror movie about a shock jock who gets marooned at a Canadian radio station after some controversy, and basically it's a zombie movie where the entire thing takes place from the inside of a radio station. They kind of are calling around. There's sort of like a War of the Worlds vibe to it as well. They're getting reports in about what's happening with this zombie virus that's outbreaking, and it folds in sound and the idea of speech in a way that is unlike anything I've ever seen in any movie before or since. Really smart way to incorporate audio, not just into the storytelling, but into the horror as well. It's a great example, and after you see Undertone, I'd be curious to see what you would think of Pontypool. Hit me in the comments if you actually watch Pontypool, let me know what you think of it. Undertone's nondescript visual sensibility further hampers those identity issues. Tucson favors languid takes with the camera, drifting around the naturalistically lit recording space, creating a sense that something terrifying is lurking just out of view. Undertone's narrative rhythm seldom allows for that dread to pay off during the sessions though, as it's usually after those that Evie is seeing hints that the entity from the tapes may be encroaching on her. So as the movie goes, the recording sessions actually start to feel like a safer space for Evie. As for when she's checking to see what's going bump in the night, Evie plays out a familiar pattern of walking to the source of the noise and either finding nothing, or at most there may be something creepy that activates in soft focus just out of her field of view. Undertone's visual and aural approaches to horror seldom feel like they're working in concert, and neither is consistently effective enough to make up for the shortcomings of the other. The mix of the movie's unsettling tone and the mystery of just what's causing the chaos on the tapes and how that chaos is bleeding into Evie's life are each compelling enough to keep Undertone afloat as it goes, but don't expect it to echo with you too long after its 94 minutes are up. As Evie, Nina Kiri has got a hell of a job in selling the horror of what's on those tapes all by herself on screen. Dramatizing the act of active listening is a tall order, but Kiri does well matching the pitch of Evie's reactions to what's going on in the recordings without ever selling anything too hard. That composure carries into moments where she's struggling with her relationship to alcohol or investigating the increasingly strange occurrences around her house, like the appearances of strange tokens or her mom somehow appearing out of bed, despite being effectively brain dead. But in the moments where Evie speaks to her unresponsive mama, Kiri does adopt a childlike tone that feels a little incongruous to the more assertive Evie that we see during the podcast tapings, even if she's not in character in front of the mic. The choice to infantilize Evie in that way, especially as she considers having a child of her own, feels aimed at propping up Undertone's motherhood theme, which, with Mama's failing health and Jessa's harrowing circumstances at front of mind, seems like it should be a far more prominent part of Undertone's full picture than it winds up being. Evie is at a fascinating point in her life, debating whether to go right from being a full-time caregiver to her mom to a full-time caregiver to a child of her own. So it's increasingly aggravating for that idea to get more and more backgrounded to the surface-level supernatural spookies that are pulling her mind in different directions. Not helping any of this is Justin, Evie's grating London-based co-host. As the true believer of the show, Justin's the one more concerned with the theater of the podcast, but even when Justin's not amping up his showmanship when in character, DeMarco is less successful than Kiri at matching his emotional tenor to what's going on in Evie's house. Most of Justin's dialogue is nakedly designed to keep the plot moving or to prompt Evie to reveal a little bit more about how she's feeling, but as the only other real character in the movie, especially because he's off camera the whole time, Justin could have used a lot more fleshing out for as much airtime as his voice gets.
You're gonna love this. I got something juicy.
Ooh.
10 mysterious audio recordings from an anonymous email.
Undertone is getting a 5. A24's buzzy new horror film gets off to a fine start with an audio-focused approach that sets the stage for a psychologically and sensorially intense horror experience that never really takes off. Most of Undertone's scares and narrative choices have been played out in other horror movies and to much greater effect, which would have been more forgivable if the film had more consistently tied those movements to Evie's struggles with the crossroads she finds herself at, leaving a pretty solid Nina Kiri stranded in what's ultimately an effectively moody but disjointed feature debut for Ian Tucson that sounds better in concept than it plays on screen.
Let me guess, it's a demonic possession.
Okay, easy, all right.
Thank you for watching. For more movie reviews, check out what we thought of The Bride, and for everything else movies, you're already in the right place, IGN.